Part 11, Cortical Maps. Continuing in the vein of wild speculation, I propose that wherever you see oscillations in the brain, they are evidence of a standing wave oscillation in the brain, and that adjacent brain regions oscillate in synchrony with each other. And indeed, there is a global synchrony of the cortex with the subcortical regions, and of course, a synchrony across the whole cortex. There are likely also oscillations of the whole brain, synchronous oscillations, as well as perhaps oscillations left and right, and top and bottom, and whatever. I propose that the gyri and sulci of the cortex demarcate the standing wave patterns in different areas, with the sulci acting as nodes of oscillation, while the gyri serve as spatial maps of sensory or motor space. I propose that the oscillation pattern predated the emergence of gyri and sulci, being present when the embryonic cortex was smooth. I propose that it was the standing waves across the smooth cortex that first governed the formation of gyri and sulci. I propose that there are coherent resonance across complete cortical areas. For example, that the parietal lobe oscillates back and forth, and so does the frontal lobe in synchrony with the parietal lobe, and so do the visual and temporal cortices oscillate in synchrony as a whole. The cortical resonances are not just a simple back and forth oscillation. There are also components at higher frequencies that fill in the details of the larger patterns in a fractal self-similar manner. The spatial mapping of the primary somatosensory and motor cortices is not an accident, but is direct evidence for spatial processing in the cortex. For example, in the primary somatosensory cortex, the mapping of the face is presumed to be represented by patterns of activation in the neural tissue. The experience cannot be reduced to this flickering of cortical patterns of energy, because there's also an explicit spatial experience associated with that cortical activation. But that spatial image cannot exist in some orthogonal space inaccessible to scientific scrutiny, but right here in the living cortex of the brain, where there is a neurophysiological mechanism to sustain that image. The symmetry across the central sulcus suggests a symmetrical wave-like oscillation between the sensory and motor cortices. And it is this wave that keeps the parts of the map in synchrony with each other. How do we paint images on the cortex using electrical activity? Well, let's take some inspiration from Jerobeam Fenderson, who paints images on his oscilloscope using sound. So noteworthy is that this is a cyclic representation. It paints the image again and again endlessly. It can either paint static images, the same image again and again, or dynamic images where the image shifts. The image is expressed in cyclic form so it can repeat. It uses an intrinsic metric, plotting the x against the y, so this avoids the jaggies that you'd get from a raster scanning system. This is indeed the vector graphics principle. You paint out the whole image again and again. And the sound that you hear is not incidental. The sound is actually what is painting out the image. So in the next video, we've got a left audio controls the lateral deflection of the oscilloscope in X and Y, in X, and the right audio controls the vertical in Y.
We're gonna use our left audio channel for horizontal deflection, and our right audio channel for vertical deflection. Now first we need a sine wave on our horizontal deflection channel, and a cosine wave on our vertical deflection channel. Together, they add up to a beautiful circle. We can alter its size and shape by increasing or decreasing the volume of both channels. Now we add a sawtooth waveform to the right channel. Our circle or ellipse turns into a spiral. To get this spiral into the shape of a mushroom, we need to multiply our left channel with a sine wave of the same frequency as the sawtooth. But we're only gonna use the sine's last quarter. Of course we want our mushroom to move, just like in real life. That's why we now add another sawtooth, multiplied with a cosine wave of a slightly different frequency to our left channel. We can increase the number of mushrooms by dividing the cosine's frequency by 2, or even by 3. By randomly adding square waves, we get even more mushrooms. In fact, we can plant an entire field.
Part 12, Predictions for Neuroscience.